All right. Hello and welcome to week 6. We are already at the halfway mark for the course and moving on to the narrative of competencies. In this section, you will focus in on the course you are challenging and using the course content summary as your guide, explain your learning. This process will take time and a number of reviews and edits, so you want to plan your time wisely. The narrative of competencies is where you will really explain your learning as it relates to a specific NOVA course. This section, along with the supporting documentation you provide, will be the determiner in whether or not your portfolio earns credit. This is really what the evaluator is looking at, matching up those course objectives with your learning to make sure that you've met those competencies. Now, the narrative of competencies is divided into 3 sections, as shown on the screen. The top one is the description of experience. The second one is documentation. And the third one is learning from experience. Now, the description of experience, the very top one, is the what, the where, and the when. As you can see on the screen, it shows you with this example, this is the experience. So you're just simply describing this experience. You're giving the date that it occurred or the time range, March 1999, what it is. This person completed the Preparing for Command course through the New York State Fire Service Training Program. So that's the what. And then where did this occur? Where was this training? Or where was this job? Or where did you travel? Something like that. And for this case, it's Wappingers Falls, New York. So that's a pretty simple one. You're just plugging in that information. It's kind of like what you did with your chronological record. You can take that information from there. Now the second section, the documentation. Now the documentation you will use will directly support your learning claims for each section. You may use a piece of documentation for more than one experience. There is more information about the documentation examples in the Assignments tab under Week 8 in Blackboard. So there's a whole document about documentation. It provides examples and gives you what a good piece of documentation is. But as you can see on the screen, for this you will simply have your documentation numbered. So number 1 will connect to the number 1 piece of documentation on your documentation section in your ePortfolio. You might have number 1 there. You might have 1, 2, 3. You might have 1, 4, 5, 6. You know, depending on how many pieces of documentation you need to support the claims of your learning, that will, determine how many pieces you put in there. 1 may be enough. You might just have 1 really good piece of documentation, but you might have a couple or 3 that you really feel demonstrate the learning that you claim that you have. So you might want to put those in there too. It just depends. You want to make sure that you're being thorough, but you're not overwhelming the evaluator with the pieces of documentation. So it's kind of a fine line, and I can definitely help you with that too. Now the last section on here, the Learning from Experience section, is where you explain your learning as it relates to the course content summary. So as you can see on the screen, you will match the specific objective to your learning description. So in one experience, you may be describing your learning for just 1 or 2 objectives, or you may be describing your learning for 4 or 5 objectives. You also may have 2 or 3 different experiences that demonstrate the same objective. That's okay. Your understanding and learning will grow over time, so you will be demonstrating that. So with your explanations, and this is something we'll discuss today with your pre-work, but you'll be matching up those learning experiences with the specific objectives in your course content summary. So you might have one experience where it was the first time that you did something, and so it covers that objective, but it just covers it at an introductory level. And then you might have a second experience a couple years later where you cover that same objective again, but since it's not the first time that you've done it, you have more understanding and more mastery of that objective, and as you write your narrative of competencies, your learning story, that will show to the evaluator, because it'll show your growth over time, where the first time you did it, it was kind of an introduction, you were learning the ropes a little bit, and then as you continued to do it in different positions with different experiences, you mastered that. And maybe you got to the point where you could teach others to do it or something like that, you know, but it definitely will show your growth over time with that. So if you repeat objectives, that's great. If you only use one in there, that's okay too. You might use one, you might use 5. It really just depends. And some of these learning from experience descriptions will be very long, because you're really telling your story, you're giving a lot of details, you're giving examples, you're talking about the change in your learning. So it can be pretty lengthy once you're all finished with it. And that's great, because it means that you've been thorough and you've really demonstrated your learning, and that increases your chances for getting credit, which is what we're after. All right, now you are explaining your college level learning. So your learning descriptions must focus on concrete experiences, observations, and outcomes. These descriptions must also concentrate on concepts, generalizations, testing of these concepts, and application. The narrative of competencies should convey both what you know and how you learned it. The process of your learning must be clear. So really describing the process. What are your thought processes? What are your action processes? What are you doing to demonstrate that you know that information and you understand the theories and concepts behind the practical application of what you're doing? Just like we discussed early on in the course, new learning typically brings about change. Change in behavior, change in thought, change in actions, etc. In this section, you will be explaining that change. You are telling the story of your learning. Okay, now throughout our lives we are always learning, but not all learning is college level. To get credit for the portfolio, you must demonstrate that your learning is college level. The guidelines can help. These guidelines can help. So as you're writing about your learning, keep these guidelines in mind. The first one, the learning is describable. And this is the whole point of the portfolio. You're describing your learning. So as a general rule, college level learning can be communicated to another person using written or verbal language. In fact, communicating learning through language is the basis of portfolio preparation. Therefore, for you to earn credit for your learning, you must be able to describe it in words. That is especially true in skill areas like computer skills or auto mechanics, or in more effective areas like personal growth or interpersonal communication. Students often report, "I know I can do it, I just never think about it much." However, it is the thinking about it that helps establish learning as college level. All right, and the second one, your learning is reasonably current. This is especially important in IT and computer courses, where it most likely will not be accepted if the learning is past 7 years old. But in most cases, you want your learning to be relatively current. For instance, maybe someone worked as a mechanic over 15 years ago, but for the past 10 years has worked as a manager at a retail store. Now, if that person has not worked on a car since changing jobs, most likely he has forgotten many of the skills and knowledge he had to perform that role. On the other hand, if he works as a retail manager but has continued to fix his own cars or other cars on the side, he keeps up with current automotive trends, he knows the changing systems, engines, you know what I'm trying to say. He's keeping current with the industry, then that learning can still be considered current because he's still practicing it, and most likely it has continued to develop over time. The third one, the learning has general applicability. Your learning should be applicable outside the situation in which it was acquired. For example, You may know the personnel procedures at the company in which you work. For you to earn credit for this knowledge, you would also need to know how those procedures would apply at other companies or how they relate to the field of personnel administration in general. So being able to demonstrate and explain applicability outside of the context in which you learned something really shows understanding and mastery of that knowledge, that information. So you definitely want to do this in here, and that's one way to show college level learning. Alright, your learning fits into academic disciplines. Now this is key because we match it up with courses. So at NOVA, the portfolio program is set up as a course match. Students create portfolios for specific courses in their degree programs. The learning must align with the requirements outlined in the chosen course to earn credits with the portfolio. The way you learn the information or skills may be much different than the method students in the classroom use to learn it, but the learning outcomes will be similar. Alright, your learning includes both theories and applications. Your learning should include both theoretical and practical understanding of a subject area. If your learning is theoretical, you should be able to apply your knowledge in a practical context. If your learning is practical or applied, you should understand the whys and the hows of what you do. So really thinking about why you do things and then being able to explain that. Do not expect to receive college credit for a mere application of a manual skill or a narrowly prescribed routine. Remember, it is the thinking about the learning that gets you the credit and the being able to describe that. Next one, the learning is verifiable. You must be able to verify your learning to receive credit for it. Verification is the process of assembling evidence that you know what you claim to know. This is where the documentation section comes in. The documentation you use needs to further support your learning claims. And there are some really great examples in the week 8 assignment sections to help you with that too. Next one, the learning is more than common to all. Some very common learning is not acceptable as college level learning. Learning which results from, for instance, marriage, parenting, and family living is usually not appropriate for the portfolio. Your learning in these areas may qualify for credit only if you have enriched it through readings and research. So for example, complementing your knowledge gained from raising children by reading and researching in the area of child development or education. Enriched by analytical thinking. For example, comparing the American family with family units in other countries, or enriched through communication. For example, teaching other adults good techniques of money management, or writing newsletters or articles about events or ideas. Okay. And lastly, learning must not repeat learning for which credit has already been awarded. If NOVA has already awarded you credit, or if you have transfer credit for a particular course, you cannot challenge that same course with any credit for prior learning methods. Along these lines too, if you attempted and failed a course, you cannot use credit for prior learning, and that includes portfolios, tests, evaluated programs, all those credit for prior learning methods to fulfill those credits. So you must retake a class if you have already attempted it. Your learning must come from your experiences outside the formal classroom, not from a more advanced course you took at NOVA in the same subject area. So if you're challenging, for instance, an IT class, and you've completed a more advanced course, and then you decide you want a portfolio, one of those introductory courses, your sole learning experiences cannot be based on that course you took at NOVA. You can definitely supplement your learning with mention of some of those things that you learned in that class, but the main bulk of your learning explanations must be based on experience by learning outside the classroom. So keep that in mind when you're working through there too. Okay. Now, with the college level learning guidelines in mind, we want to turn our attention back to the course content summary. In preparation for writing the narrative of competencies, we're going to focus this week on matching up our learning experiences with the course objectives from the summary. So we're going to really do a lot of pre-work this week in preparation for diving in and writing the narrative next week. So on the screen, you can see an example of the course content summary for NOVA's CST Principles of Public Speaking course. Now, as you know, since you already chose your course content summaries, they don't all look like this. Some have the objectives nicely laid out with bullets. Some are much more extensive in their descriptions. Each summary is a little bit different. So if you're looking at your summary and it just looks like a jumbled mess and you need a little help navigating through it, definitely reach out. I'd be more than happy to help you pick it apart, because some of them, and this is a pretty extreme example of them. Most of them have bullets for their objectives, but as you can see in the center of the screen, the objectives for this course are written in a paragraph. So you really do have to separate those objectives out to be able to match them up with and focus in on those different skills and that different knowledge that you need when you're writing your narrative. So with your course content summary, you want to study it. Read through each section, pick it apart, make sure you understand it. If you have any questions, anything is unclear, reach out about it. Make sure that you really have a thorough grasp of everything in there. Think about what they are expecting students to know when they finish this course, and how each objective or main topic matches up with your experiential learning. It may be helpful to print out the course content summary, and I definitely recommend this just because it's easy, and that way you can make notes on it, you can clarify things for yourself, you can jot in, if you have a learning experience that definitely matches up with something, you can jot it in there so that you have it. But it helps you to really start thinking and working through how you're going to explain your learning. So the first part is really just to print out that course content summary, pick it apart if you need to, separate those objectives out, and then also read through each objective thoroughly, make notes on it, put it in your own words possibly. Make sure that you really understand what they're asking you to know. And then you can also, those main topics down there, those are things that you'll need to incorporate into your learning descriptions as well. So go through those and match those up with the objectives. Those are things that they're covering in class too. And that can help you when you're writing your descriptions to really stay on track with what they're doing in class, because not only do you have the objective, but you also have topics that they're covering too. So they kind of go hand in hand, and that'll help you expand on some of those different elements in the class. Okay. Now here is an example of a pre-work activity to prepare you to write your narrative. These are objectives from the course content summary that we just viewed, the Principles of Public Speaking CST 100, on the previous slide. Now these course objectives have been divided out from that paragraph that we saw in the middle of the screen. So you might have to do this too for yours. But on the screen are two learning experiences that are matched up with the course objectives. So you can see the first one at the very top. It says experience, and this is just like it would be in your narrative of competencies section. It gives you the when, which is November 2011 through July 2013, the what, member of Toastmasters, and the where. This happened in Fairfax, Virginia. Now if you slide down to the middle of the screen, there's a second experience. Same kind of setup. January 2013 to present, district manager, Starbucks, Northern Virginia. So as you can see, this goes in chronological order as well. Just like with your chronological record, events through your life, your learning develops over time. So you want your experiences to be in order of, at the top will be, when you first started and were exposed to these different things, and then down toward the bottom, and as the evaluator reads through your descriptions, they'll see the mastery of the content of the information, because you'll show the change in your thinking, your understanding, your growth will show over time. Now, with these two different experiences, they're matched up with course objectives from the course content summary. So you can see the first one, there are a couple objectives listed under there, Objective B and Objective D. The second one, there's only one objective. Like we mentioned before, you might have one, you might have two, you might have five. It just really depends on the experience and the extent that it covers the information in the course content summary. So you will be focusing on different aspects of that experience to explain your learning for each objective. By doing this pre-work in this way, it will give you a quick reference to organize your learning before you start writing. I've also included some of the main topics so you can see a way to do that. When you're thinking about that experience and you've written those objectives that apply to that experience in there, look through those main topics and see which ones apply as well, and then jot those down there too. And this is just, similar to a pre-writing outline that you would do. It's something to organize your thoughts, help you prioritize your learning experiences, and then really get thinking about your learning in preparation for writing those learning descriptions. Now, this pre-work is not something that you will be turning in, but it is a way to organize your learning and experiences as they relate to the course content objectives before jumping into full-on writing the narrative. You may decide to create a different type of pre-writing visual. Maybe you prefer to use a circle graph or bubbles or something like that works a little better for you and is a little more visually stimulating. But this is just an example of a way to get started, because that's really what you want to do this week. You're organizing everything so that when you go to start writing that, you feel prepared, you've really thought everything through, and you know exactly what you want to say. Okay, and lastly, as part of your pre-work, you will be turning each learning objective in the course content summary into a learning outcome. Now, the difference between an objective and an outcome is the tense. The verb tense that's written in the sentence. A learning objective states that you will do or you will learn something, and a learning outcome is saying that you have learned or you have done something. So on the screen you can see the objective. That's what students look at when they're starting a class. So they're saying, what am I going to get out of this class? What are the objectives? And for this example, the student will develop speaking and listening competencies for effective speech composition and delivery. So that's what the student will get out of this class through the activities, the assignments, the assessments, everything in that class. Now what you have a learning outcomes because you have already learned this information. So that's how you will be writing your learning descriptions. You're coming into this subject already having done it through your experiential learning. So you're not writing objectives, you're writing outcomes. So your outcome, as you can see on the screen, would be something like, I have developed speaking and listening competencies for effective speech composition and delivery, and have demonstrated these competencies and you might give an example of your work experience, or a time when you gave a speech, or something to that effect, because you've practiced these, you've done these, so you can give some details in your opening sentences for your learning descriptions, saying, giving your information about what you're going to talk about. So that's part of this pre-work too, is taking each of those objectives, writing a learning outcome statement, and then you'll use those learning outcome statements to start your learning descriptions. Um, so one thing that's great about this is that it really helps the evaluator, the faculty evaluator, when they're looking through your learning descriptions. They can easily follow what you're saying. Everything is very clear. It's very clear what objective, what outcome, it will be an outcome at this point, what outcome you are describing. It's very clear what experience you're using. So this is part of your pre-work too. Take those objectives, turn them into outcomes, expand on them a little bit, like the example at the bottom with the ... the ellipsis. Expand on those and give some details of your experience. Okay, so as you complete your pre-work, which will be your outline, where you're matching up the objectives with your experiences, incorporating those main topics in there, reading through your course content summary, really making sense of that, thoroughly understanding it, and then also turning each objective into a learning outcome statement. So that's your pre-work for this week. So as you complete that, you may want to do some research to ensure you are including the vocabulary from the course, as well as supplementing with appropriate theories and concepts. So if you're looking through your course content summary and there's something that doesn't look quite right, or you're not quite sure about it, you can do a little research on it. And you might also want to check information for further understanding. So on the screen are some examples of resources that may help. So, you know, that course content summary, with each course there's an accompanying textbook. Find out what that textbook is and check it out from the library. That's perfectly okay. Any resources that you can use to help you further explain and demonstrate your learning in these areas is great. So find a copy of that textbook. Speak with some instructors in those subject areas. If you've taken some classes in that area and you know someone, talk to them and ask them, you know, am I on the right track with this? Is there anything I need to add to this course content summary? They'll help you out. That's what they're there for. Do some independent research. If you see something on there and you're not sure about it, do a Google search on it. Go to the library. Read in some journals about it. Those kind of research activities will help you supplement your knowledge in those areas. And then one good thing too is sometimes it's helpful to look at course content summaries, similar course content summaries in the same area. So that might help you, you know, further explain or further understand some of that information in there. Okay, so work on that pre-work this week. Really pick apart that course content summary. Think about your experiences, prioritize, match them up, write those learning outcome statements, and please, please, please reach out with any questions. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help. So good luck this week, and we will follow up next week. Thanks a lot.